Okay, I'll just run through the last part of the lecture, the third lecture, which was designing access for people, and in particular equal access. One of the things that is important to consider with equal access is whether you're going to have a balustrade or a handrail, and whether that, if you do have a balustrade, whether it's going to be transparent or whether your experience as a human inside or walking on this path, whether this balustrade will be at eye height or it will be at above eye height, or whether you'll have a view from the paths that you're designing. So balustrades, of course, and handrails can be all very different. These are just a couple of stair ones. But one of the things that we really need to make sure that we're keeping an eye on with that particular exercise is this point, which is that good design is not just about providing some access. It's about ensuring as far as possible that people with a disability can use buildings independently and with dignity, and that accessible entry to a new building must be the principal pedestrian entrance, not one around the back of the building. So this is particularly well demonstrated in the Oscar Niemeyer Congreso Nacional from 1960. It's a beautiful, wide access rampway. A lot of Oscar Niemeyer's work demonstrates this concept of having the ramp access integrated into the actual form of the building. But there are other ways to deal with it, this being Robson Square in Vancouver, which is known from 1983, and it combines stairs and ramps. Combined stairs and ramps are not something we do commonly in Australia now because they are often considered a tripping hazard, but it is definitely something that you should have a go at in this class. This is a particularly beautiful one. It's the Pioneer Courthouse Square in Portland. And what this one does is sort of becomes an amphitheatre as well. So the stairs become a seating area, the ramp is your access, possibly you could even use it as, you could even flood this, so you could even use it as some kind of a floodplain, but it is quite lovely. So this is the Illinois Institute of Technology in Chicago. It was the first building designed by the architect Rem Koolhaas in the United States. It's particularly good, shiny, rubbery finish, but it's also a very, you can see how the stairs just slice into the side of the ramp, and that's something that we avoid in Australia now, but you don't have to avoid it in this particular class. And this is in Aachen in North Rhine by Kade-Witteveld Architecture. It's just another really lovely example of a ramp integrated into a stair. So it's a very beautiful looking resolution. It is a multi-use space, but it isn't, and it's a fun challenge to try and resolve. Of course, designing access is not just for people, it's also for animals. This is the Ove Arup Penguin Pool from London Zoo from 1935. The whole thing, including the ramps, were intended to allow the penguins to behave naturally, and it was a result of a careful study. It's an innovative solution that was very unusual. It was a very unusual subject for the engineers. But it's also incredibly, beneath those very thin layers of concrete, the structure is working incredibly hard. We also design for bikes, so other forms of access. So this is the World Expo in Shanghai, designed by Bjarke Engels. Where you ride up to the top. Well, you don't have to ride up to the top of this thing, but you can ride up to the top of this thing, and watch water at the bottom. And then this is the Cycle Snake, which is in Copenhagen. So they're aiming to build 500 kilometres of cycling superhighway. This is another example of ramps and buildings. So we have the Guggenheim Museum, of course, in New York, which is in 1943 to 1959, where really the ramp is the building. And it's one of his most recognised masterpieces. It's definitely about the design experience. This one's a more recent Norwegian example. So this is Realf Ramstad Architects. It's particularly lovely concrete finish. This is an in-situ concrete finish where all of this is built with timber, or sacrificial timber formwork. So you can actually see, if you look at it carefully, the timber wood grain that is around all of these edges here. It's a really amazing experience because it's sort of a winding experience coming down to the water, coming down to the Atlantic Ocean, but also it's a winding experience coming back up and looking back up at the hills. And then the experience has even been thought about from the underside. So from the underside we can see there's even sort of little alcoves which are supporting that pathway. So it's a very three-dimensional problem, and we should, it's a really good design precedent to have a look at. And because it's a balustrade and it's not a transparent balustrade, they've cut windows into it so that even children who are walking along this pathway can see out towards the water. And it's particularly nice here where they've framed one, on the right hand side, they've framed one small part of their structure. And that'll probably do for that one.